Hello, and welcome to another exciting episode of Tiered. This is a show where we get to tear down the big question, why education? While there are so many topics that we could be talking about, we believe that whether it's informal or formal, there's life lessons that we get through education, knowledge, and information. On today's episode, we are joined by the Director in Social Cohesion and Equity in Education from the Department of Basic Education, Mr. Likho Bottoman. He is going to tell us more about the willingness as members of the society to cooperate and to share some resources as we learn together. Let's get straight to it. Okay, njengoba besithembisile apha ku-Tiered Education, today we are in conversation with Likho Bottoman, who is the Director in Social Cohesion and Equity in Education at the Department of Basic Education. Likho, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me.
Such a great pleasure, sir. Today on Tiered Education, we try by all means to tear down the big question that all of us have. We all know education is not so fashionable, and when we talk of education, everyone just thinks about going to school.
Absolutely.
So the whole purpose today is to find out, why do people like you support educational progress and programs and also are part of education in the education sector? So before we get there, I just want to know a little bit about you. How was your upbringing like, especially at home with your parents? Were they supporting you in your education? How was it like?
Well, I would say that I come from a very supportive family.
Yes.
A family that believed that life exists only in three places. Life exists at home, at school, and at church.
Sure.
And those were the three main places where we lived throughout my childhood.
Wow.
I was taken to a technical high school because there was a belief that I would become an engineer. And I also wanted to be an engineer with all my heart.
Sure.
But I realized that I actually don't have the acumen or the attitude that is required to become an engineer. And somehow I then came to education.
When did you come to that realization?
Well, I'm a trained occupational therapist by profession.
Wow.
So I went into occupational therapy because I really like to see people achieve their full potential. And I'm also very curious about why things happen the way that they do.
Oh my goodness.
So I've worked as an occupational therapist for a while. And then when I was doing my postgrad studies in public administration, I then developed an interest in public policy. So the Department of Education then, before we had the Department of Basic Education, had an opportunity for somebody who would come in as an assistant director for health promotion. And I thought it's a very good opportunity for me, because then I could go into a place where I would do public policy, but still bring in my health profession
expertise.
Skills and expertise, yes. So that's how I got into education. I was not necessarily interested in education. I was a health professional, wanted to continue as a health professional, but then I also had this interest in public policy, and the basic education sector provided that opportunity for me.
Look at that. I mean, when passion meets, expertise and professionalism, there's sparks, because you get to enjoy what you're doing.
Absolutely.
But not all of us are doing our best jobs, what we dreamed of doing, What keeps you motivated in doing what you love right now and being in the education space?
You see, Spongsen, I wake up every morning.
Yes.
And by the way, I hate waking up in the mornings. So when I wake up, I'm not the happiest
You have
person.
to. Sorry, you have to.
But I have to wake up because the alarm has gone off. But what gets me out of bed is the thought about that child who is in some village in South Africa waiting for me to punch on the keyboard so that their lives can change.
Sure.
And so for me, what keeps me going is that I know that every alphabet that I punch on that keyboard, and every conversation I have on the phone, and every meeting that I spend my time in has got implications for changing the life of a vulnerable child in South Africa.
Well, that leads me to the next question of understanding what is social cohesion and equity in education. What do you do exactly?
So we come from a history of division
Yes.
in South Africa. And that history has caused a lot of inequality in our society. And a lot of communities are dealing with the problem of human rights that are being infringed.
Yes.
And these human rights are being infringed intentionally or unintentionally. And we've got a constitution in this country, and that constitution is not even 30 years old.
Yes.
And so we continue to provide constitutional literacy for the people of South Africa, because the constitution is the supreme law of the country.
Yes.
And so what that means is that people need to understand what the supreme law says. And so when we want to close those divisions, we've got to do what we call social cohesion, so that we create that connectedness in communities. And because schools exist in communities,
yes.
schools are not immune to the inequalities and the infringements of human rights that exist in society. But also because of that history of division and apartheid, we've got to then do what we call nation building. How do we then build and reconstruct a South African society that understands diversity, that understands equality, that also has got positive regard of the differences and the multiculturalism and the multi-identities that you find in society, that we can then live as a rainbow nation. But also on the side, we've got a responsibility as basic education to just ensure that we provide learner social support programs.
Yes.
Because we do provide learner health and well-being programs, we do provide curriculum, we do provide them with materials like your learning and teaching support materials, your textbooks and everything.
Yes.
But we also need to provide social support to these children so that they become well-rounded, holistic products when they leave the education system.
And what are some of those programs that, speaks to the latter?
For example, within the human rights education component, we've got the National Schools Moot Court.
Yes.
Where children get an opportunity to deal with the real law, and they get in court and they debate certain cases. Sometimes it's real cases, but sometimes we really just give them fake cases, but so that we can see if they're able to apply the constitution as the law in those particular cases. We also have the Inkosi Albert Luthuli Oral History Program, which recognizes that the documented history that we have in this country is not a true reflection of the history.
Sure.
Because some of the things that are in that history have been discarded. So we give an opportunity to young people to go out in their communities, and they undertake research about unsung heroes and heroines in their communities.
Sure.
And they get an opportunity to come and present that and bring that into the narrative of the history, because the history of this country is very rich.
It's too rich,
But at the moment, because the history that we use is the only history that is provided in the documented spaces like your textbooks and your online histories that we have, we lose out on the richness and the wealth of knowledge that exists in communities. So within the Inkosi Albert Luthuli Oral History Program, then, children get an opportunity to unearth those undocumented histories in their communities. We also have got some work that we do around gender equality.
Yes.
Because
that's a big talk right now in the country and in the world in general.
Yes, and that's the basis. Sometimes we are told that the understanding and the constructions, the social constructions of gender and gender equality actually have got a causal factor on gender-based violence and femicide, for example.
Sure.
Because when you grow up in an environment that teaches you about these inequalities in terms of gender, you go out into society and you enact what you've learned and that construction of gender. And so we catch them when they're still young, and we help them understand the concept of gender equality, and we help them understand what it means to coexist as the different sexes. But also we help them understand that gender is non-binary.
Yes.
Gender is very diverse, and that they need to be ready to receive the diversity that we see in gender in terms of diverse sexual orientations and gender identities, so that there is harmony in school communities.
While it all seems nice on paper and it's all talk, the reality is we still have a lot of gender stereotypes, and there's a lot of education that still needs to be done in the communities and in the schools, where we need to demystify some of the notions that people believe, in terms of gender equality, gender orientation, and sexual orientation in general. However, what is the department doing in terms of promoting that kind of inclusion, especially where we live in communities where there's the LGBTQI plus community, which always feels excluded. We have children with disability in our schools, which some always feel left out in so many things.
It's not going to be a very easy thing to do, Sibongiseni, because, as I'm saying, because it is embedded in the history and in the a social makeup, a social DNA
Yes.
of our society, we're going to have to identify key levers of change for us to be able to do that. We've got 5 key levers of change that we have identified as the basic education sector. Within the curriculum, we provide a curriculum that embraces the diversity that we're talking about. And so through life orientation and the delivery of comprehensive sexuality education, that's where we deal with these cases of gender equality,
Yes.
and diverse sexual orientations and gender identities, and so forth, including these issues of social change, social cohesion, and nation building. The second lever that we have identified is in teacher development and teacher
Yes.
training.
Yes.
Because if you've got a curriculum that is situated like that, you have to have the right cadre of teachers that can deliver that curriculum content.
Very key.
And so you're
Very
looking
key.
at pre-service training and in-service training to make sure that there's a balance, that universities and other institutions of training, they do produce teachers who are ready to teach in such a constitutional environment.
Sure.
But also once they are out and you identify skill set gaps, that you're able to fill in those gaps. Then the third area is learning and teaching support material.
Yes.
That if you've got the curriculum, you've got the right kind of teachers, then you've got to provide learning materials that
that's
have got
relevant.
all the illustrations and the content and everything.
Yes.
Right? And then the fourth lever is looking at the core curriculum space, because life orientation has got a very small time allocation in the timetables. We've got to then support what we say in the classroom with co-curricular activity. That in our co-curricular programming, we do have interventions that look at amplifying what you say in the classroom. And so you ensure that you reinforce what you say in the classroom in your messaging and your communication in curriculum and learning and teaching support material. And the last one is about making sure that we provide information and education support material, like your IEC material and communication material, pamphlets. I think now we've moved beyond pamphlets.
Digital,
Yeah,
yeah.
we've gone digital
Yes,
now.
yes, yes.
So the social media space has got to be flustered with all this knowledge and this information about these issues, so that all of these levers that I've just mentioned to you now are balanced even outside of the classroom.
Sure. While you talk so nice, Likho, how far-reaching are these programs? Because you might be sitting nicely there at the department in your office and say, these are the programs that we have. How do you monitor these programs? What is your evaluation process to ensure that these things are happening on the ground, even to the most disempowered communities?
You know, we have been very critical of ourselves for a very long time, and I think it's because we didn't quite do the necessary monitoring to really see the real essence of the impact and the reach of the work that we do.
Yes.
And so we're really just dependent on what we know and what we can say about what we do.
Okay.
Once we started the recent monitoring that we did in districts and provinces, we learned from provinces that there is work that they do with or without the national department. The only thing that they get from us is really just guidance on what they need to do in their schools and in their school communities. But by and large, work is happening. We are humbled by the commitment that we see from teachers and from district coordinators, from provincial departments of education, the work and the effort that they put into ensuring that these programs do reach children and
I
schools.
hear you. It's a joint venture.
Yes,
Yeah.
but unfortunately, we've got more than 25,000 schools in this country.
Sure.
We've got more than 12 million learners. It's very difficult. So the involvement of civil society organizations and all
very
of our
key.
partners who are coming on board to really help us with this work, it's really happening. But I can't really give you quantifiable information about how far we have gone, which is encompassing of everyone's effort. I can only tell you about what we do and what we direct from the national department, which sometimes looks very small. But if you go into the provinces and you really collect the data about the reach and the impact, you'll be surprised by what you see.
Well, I put it to you as a challenge that you start looking into that next year and make sure that when we have another engagement, there's quantifiable data that we can debate about and look at. However, the most important part of the show is where we ask you the big question: why education? Why are you into education? Why do you support educational programs? And why do you work for the Department of Basic Education? You could be working elsewhere doing other fun stuff.
So as I said earlier when I was introducing myself to you, Sibongisen, I really think it was something that happened by chance. I wasn't intending to work in the education sector.
Sure.
But once I went in, I then realized that the ground is so fertile for health professionals. And I'm saying this even for people who are at home, who are thinking that because you're a health professional, therefore you are forced to work in the health sector.
Health sector, yes.
I'm just saying to them that there is space for health professionals even in the education sector. And I know that even in the social development sector, there is space for them. But I think the hidden germ, the hidden opportunities that exist in education need to be unearthed today. That really it was an opportunity that happened by chance. I found myself there and I realized that there is something that I can give of me on a daily basis.
Yes.
And just making sure, because many of the people that we work with are really educationists or education professionals, and they are very clued up and they are very good at what they do. And that the balance that we give each other between ourselves as health professionals and the education specialists that we work with in the sector it happens so nice. It's like we are hand in glove basically, because we needed them to open the space, but they also need us to be able to bring in the knowledge and the skills and the direction that we should take. And it's amazing how we have come just as a sector. The moment we opened our doors for all of these other professionals to come into the space and be actors in the space, we have achieved so much.
Wow.
The work that we do, Sibongisen, is we consider it as the heartbeat of education.
Sure.
Because we can have the best institutions, we can have the best teachers, we can have the best curriculum, but if your learners are not well, and if your learners don't feel socially supported, it's futile.
Socially and emotionally, very important.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much, Likho. I mean, we can talk about education all day, all night. It doesn't end, and definitely even at home, the conversations continue on tiered education. To hear your views, what are your thoughts of what is happening on the ground as well, just to get some feedback from you. It's very important, whether it happens by chance or intentionally so, as you've heard from Likho. There's always a reason for everybody to be involved in the education sector, and there's a part that we can all play in the education sector. But from me and the rest of the team on Tiered Show, thank you guys.